Grace Talks. It's Thursday. Late night edition, you probably want to hear this to Friday. But that's totally okay. Great day to be alive and great day to be on the podcast with you. Thank you for joining us. Hope your day is going great. Now, I've told you over the years that one of the reasons that we're doing this podcast is just to encourage and, dare I say, even inspire people to think. And certainly at times thinking can be a hard thing to do. But it's something that we want to do in terms of having conversations with people and stretching out, finding what we believe, because I think that's the way that we have conversations with people, or the reason we have conversations with people, so that it can help us to understand and to know what we really do think about things. I think that's particularly important, that we realize what we do think, and in knowing what we think, we begin to gain a certain perspective, not just a perspective, but a principles in our own life because of what we have thought. And today I got a really good friend that I've been talking to for years and years, been a friend of mine since I was in high school, and I'm really excited to talk to my friend Adrian Glover. And talking to Adrian is kind of like going back down memory lane and just reconnecting. We had such a good experience together in high school, but some of the things that I immediately learned in talking to him, like one of the first questions I asked him, how are you doing? And he immediately started to talk about how he had experienced this time during the shutdowns and the lockdown. And I think he can really relate to a lot of people. This is Adrian. When I asked how he's doing.
Oh, well, some valleys, some peaks and hills, but overall I'm okay. I'm trying to take care of my mental health. It's something I didn't value as much before COVID as much. So I'm starting a new position and relocating back to Austin and stuff. So I'm trying to get my priorities together and stuff like that. So that's my main focus over the last, 6-7 months.
Just for a little backstory, Adrian lived in Seattle just for a couple of years, I believed. And he really talks about how that environment was different for him and trying to navigate moving back to the Bible Belt, Austin, Texas. But when he mentions mental health to me, I was immediately fascinated to just see how maybe he could relate to other people that were figuring out in this season that something was off and something was different about how they were feeling emotionally. So I asked him, how did he hone in on a desire to make that a priority?
I think it's probably 2 or 3 factors that probably merged together. The first was I was in the current work environment about 7 months ago with an employer that I really didn't find favorable. It's kind of, people use the word toxic, but overall it was this environment that people were flying like left and right and going to new positions. And I could see why, because of the management style and a lot of pressure on you. And when you go to a job every day, 5 days out of the week that you don't really appreciate or you don't really care for, that could leave you kind of distraught or kind of upset, disappointed, frustrated, all those emotions that coincide with that. And that was just one valley. And then a second was COVID as well. Everybody's at home, and it seemed kind of enjoyable at first to work from home and stuff. And myself, I'm a single guy in an apartment. After a while, you go and look at the walls so much before you start thinking, how can I have an escape, or who can I communicate with or spend time with? And people are being safe, which they should. So that had me in a little bit of a spiral, a little bit of how to best manage my time. And then third is kind of like you have holidays and stuff like that. And being, like I said, a single man again, a couple of things I've questioned the Lord about was pretty much my relationship and what he had planned for me in the future. And then all those 3 together kind of had me in a little spiral. So looking at my United Healthcare benefits and stuff, I started taking my time and seeing a therapist once every month, or at that time bi-monthly, until I felt more comfortable, and then started finding out what's best for me. And why am I thinking this way and how to cope for that. And, trying to find a good church outlet as well was kind of struggling in this new environment. They didn't really know many people or good recommendations. So that was pretty much what took me to my mental health focus on making sure that's a priority and putting, my thought process first while I'm making decisions. And that's what I've been really focused on the last, 7-8 months.
I have to be honest, when I invited Adrian onto the show, I wasn't really expecting to be talking about mental health. I wanted to talk to him more about African-American issues, just kind of his ideas on kind of where we were as a society in dealing with some of those issues, and particularly Black History Month. But I thought it was worthwhile because of the shape of this podcast to dive into some of those thoughts. Particularly, why don't African-Americans, predominantly, or especially men, go to counseling? When you talked about mental health just a second ago, we have dived into counseling and really focusing on anxiety and some things on this podcast. But we were also talking about it in the terms of Christians and why Christians don't go to counseling. But I also want to ask you that in the terms of African Americans or even minorities, but particularly African Americans, is it kind of stigmatized for us as African-American men, especially African-American men, not to deal with our mental health, not to take counseling, not to go to counselors and focus on that part of our lives?
Yeah, I mean, you put it square on the head. I mean, African-American, primarily males, just don't really seek assistance on many avenues when it comes to medical. I mean, African-American males are one of the last to go to medical and get, colon cancer is prominent in African-American community and stuff like that, males, because we don't want to go. And same thing as
also
well
diabetes, high blood pressure and things like that. Yeah, very prominent in our community because we don't seek that, preventative measure treatment and stuff. And that correlates over with, I guess, with seeing a therapist. You don't want to tell your strongholds, your things you have, your difficulties, imperfections to a stranger, or we're supposed to be seen as this all-purpose, not supposed to be, but sometimes America puts us on a society that we're all-purpose, we could handle anything, and we got through slavery and Jim Crow and all this other type of problematic times in our life that we have to talk to some stranger about us not getting together. And that's something I just to point what you just mentioned. I have a brother-in-law, and he is just now seeing a therapist for the first time and feeling relaxed. And he said the whole time I talked to him, what took you so long? He's like, I couldn't tell my business to some stranger, and they judged me differently. And I was like, yeah, you think that until you start opening up and talking about it, and you realize, oh man, it's way off my shoulders, and they're there for a reason. That's their profession, their specialty, to guide you and help you with some different thought processes. Yeah, I really think, I think Corona, this season of COVID has been a horrendous season. I had a guy on a couple of weeks ago that wrote a book about anxiety and how to cripple anxiety, because he noticed in his church, and he was a youth pastor, that young people were struggling and really going through anxiety like never before. Maybe it was maybe not like never before, but it was certainly brought out to him like it was never has been before. And one thing that I've really have seen during this time is that there has been a focus, or God's really slowed us down and said, okay, these are the things that you need to prioritize in your life. And so when you look at it that way, there has been a blessing that came out of this Corona time. And maybe that blessing was saying, hey, these are your priorities in your life, and these are the things that you need to focus on. Right.
Agree with you. 110%.
Yeah. So when it comes to being an African-American male, and certainly I'm one of those African-American males that look at things like how we're portrayed in the media, and maybe even in this season also, like watching the George Floyd and watching some of these things that happen in the news and seeing how they were portrayed. I watch This Is Us, and because I'm one of these people that watch a show and I can't stop watching no matter how upsetting it is. And I was really upset with one of the characters, Randall. And I was really upset at how he was behaving this particular season. And I felt like, man, he's showing it's coming off like African-American men are so weak that because of this George Floyd deal, because of COVID, all this thing, we're sitting around crying and depressed all the time. And certainly I don't believe that that's the case. But I also don't think it's the case that we are, not this isn't affecting us, and we're becoming hardened through this still as well. But what is the balance for a person, a Christian, not just an African American, but a Christian that are seeing all of these things, that are facing the George Floyds, the things that are going on in our society with the lockdowns and such? What is the balance? How should we be dealing with these things? What have you found that has helped you come through this period and this time?
Okay. Oh, yeah. Before I answer that question, I mean, you mentioned about Randall, and I used to watch the first 2 seasons of that, and it was just too much for me emotionally, so I stopped watching. But
because every episode they tried to break you down and make you cry. Every episode, it's like, all right, man, come on now, give me something happy.
But I'm curious. You mentioned about Randall in this season. I haven't watched it, so I can't give you the full update, like my assessment. But I watched the first couple of seasons, and he had some trialing, upbringing, and stuff like that, being the first black kid in the family. But I think there's not many. If you look at just, I'm not a big movie buffer or stuff like that. But I like to catch up to current events, especially watch the black movies, really. And if you look at it, there's not many movies with a high-profile black actor or black male, you could say, who's very vulnerable in that state of mind. Mm-hmm. Like they're acting as the actor. Like, how many times do you see Denzel Washington or Black Panther being very vulnerable? Those guys, no, they're heroes or action heroes, or they're drunks, or they're Tyler Perry doing stuff like. You don't see that.
It's very rare. John Q. You mentioned Denzel. John Q. is one of the ones that comes out first, where he's very vulnerable. But even then, you see him go nuts. He holds a whole hospital hostage because of it. So yes, I see where you're going. Yeah. I want to pause that just for a second, because in my opinion, this is, as I have seen it, a problem to many of African Americans when you talk about how we're portrayed in the media or portrayed in movies. You see how Adrian mentioned that and just talked about the characters that we see and why he related, or maybe saw Randall as a positive figure, is because of the characters, or the way that the media, not only medias, but movies have portrayed, or television shows. And this is one thing that is a really frustrating thing, especially African-American men. I mean, we should have this conversation a lot more, and we'll get into this a little bit, but I just wanted to pause there because this is a real issue in how African-Americans feel about their portrayal in the media. Yeah,
so that's my 2 cents about that. I'd like to see more flexibility in the roles that African Americans, the males, play, and not always as some, we're hard and we can handle everything, and then we're action packed and stuff like that. But that's a different conversation for a different time.
Let me say this: I really enjoyed the first season, the first couple of seasons of This Is Us when it pertained to Randall. I thought he was one of the most likable characters on television because he was successful. He was intellectual. I thought he was a great representation of what an African-American male should aspire to be and what they actually are, because there's plenty of African-American males that are not, doing the thing that television represents them as. So I was very pleased with Randall. But he changed. He went from being one of the most likable people on television to being this selfish, everything has to revolve around him, controlling, and I don't want to tell you too much if you actually want to watch the television show, but
I won't, so go ahead.
But everything began, every decision in his life evolved around him. He came off, to me, many people argue, as very narcissistic in his behavior and everything. He was too downcast and defeated a person. And it was this spectrum. It's like, what happened to him over and to me, it was concerning again on how African-American men particularly are portrayed on television. Yes, I like the vulnerability. Yes, I like the sincerity of the portrayal. But, man, after a while, it just became poor, victimized. Randall is just – and to me, Adrian, I think that's how the African-American male is seen, especially when it comes to people or let's say good Caucasian or white people that want to help, are saying, we want to stand for African Americans. We want to stand for Black Lives Matter. We want to do all that. But it became like, I don't want to be seen like a victim or somebody that looks down upon. Don't look down upon me and say that you're actually helping me or that you're a part of the cause. You know what I mean? And that's how I felt like his character then changed to be, this poor Randall. We just need to help him and give him a pass. And I don't think that's a great representation of African Americans. So enough about that. Do you remember the second part of the question that I asked you? Because I know it was quite a long question.
I think you're talking about